My wife said our anniversary dinner was a surprise. The surprise was another man at the table, who she introduced as her new partner. I replied, "Charming." Then I paid for my meal and walked out. Next day I filed for divorce. Now she was frantically calling, but I had already blocked her number. I, 34M, thought I knew what betrayal felt like until that Tuesday evening at Romano's, our usual anniversary spot. The candles flickered the same way they had for 8 years. The burgundy tablecloth held the same wine stains from our first dinner there, and the waiter still remembered my usual order. Everything was familiar except the man sitting where I should have been sitting across from my wife. She had been acting strange for weeks. Late nights at the office became routine, her phone constantly buzzing with messages she'd quickly dismiss, and our conversations had reduced to logistics about bills and groceries. When she suggested celebrating our anniversary early because of a work conflict the following week, I should have known something was wrong. Instead, I bought her favorite flowers and made reservations at Romano's, thinking maybe this dinner would reconnect us. I arrived 5 minutes early, as always. The hostess led me to our usual corner table, and my wife was already there, looking radiant in a black dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was styled differently, and she wore makeup with more care than she'd shown in months. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring and checking her watch repeatedly. Then he walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying temples that somehow made him look distinguished rather than old. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned boardrooms. My wife's face lit up when she saw him approach, and that's when my stomach dropped to the restaurant floor. She stood up and kissed his cheek before gesturing for him to sit down. I remained frozen in my chair, trying to process what I was witnessing. The man settled into the seat beside her, not across from her, making their alliance clear from the start. My wife cleared her throat and told me she had something important to discuss. Her voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, excited but nervous, like a child about to reveal a secret they'd been dying to share. She explained that she'd been doing a lot of thinking about our marriage and had realized she needed something different in her life. The man reached across the table and shook my hand, introducing himself as her new partner. His grip was firm, his smile genuine, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. He mentioned that he'd heard so much about me and was glad we could finally meet under these circumstances. The restaurant continued buzzing around us. Other couples laughed over wine, families celebrated birthdays, and servers weaved between tables carrying steaming plates. Yet our corner felt frozen in time, suspended in surreal disbelief. My wife continued explaining that she and this man had met at a conference 6 months ago. What started as professional collaboration had evolved into something deeper. She emphasized that nothing physical had happened while we were still committed to each other, but she couldn't deny the emotional connection any longer. The man nodded along, occasionally touching her hand or smiling encouragingly. He spoke about how much they had in common professionally and personally, how they shared similar goals and values. He even mentioned that he respected our marriage and hadn't wanted to interfere, but couldn't ignore his feelings any longer. I sat there listening to them tag team their explanation like they'd rehearsed it. They spoke about mature decisions and conscious uncoupling, about remaining friends and handling things civilly. They discussed their plans to travel together and maybe start a consulting business. Through it all, I said nothing. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even process the magnitude of what was happening. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of shared dreams and compromises, 8 years of building a life together, and this was how it ended, at our anniversary dinner with a stranger outlining my replacement. The waiter approached our table, pen poised over his notepad, completely oblivious to the domestic catastrophe unfolding before him. My wife and her new partner ordered wine and appetizers as if this was a normal business dinner. They even asked if I wanted to share the calamari. That's when something inside me snapped back to reality. I looked at both of them, sitting there so comfortable with their betrayal, so confident in their approach, so certain that I would just accept this new arrangement gracefully. I told them it was charming. The single word hung in the air between us. My wife's confident expression faltered slightly, and her new partner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They had expected anger, tears, begging, or at least a lengthy discussion. They hadn't prepared for calm indifference. I signaled the waiter and ordered my usual, the salmon with risotto and a glass of their house red. If they wanted to have this conversation over dinner, I would eat dinner. I asked the waiter to bring me a separate check. My wife tried to explain that they hadn't meant for things to happen this way. She insisted that she still cared about me and hoped we could work out the practical details amicably. Her new partner jumped in, offering to help with the transition however he could, even suggesting they could assist with my housing situation since they planned to move in together. I continued eating my salmon while they talked. The fish was perfectly cooked, the risotto creamy and rich. I complimented the waiter when he checked on our table. I asked about the wine's vintage and nodded appreciatively at his recommendation for dessert. Through it all, my wife and her partner grew increasingly uncomfortable with my composure. They had orchestrated this entire evening expecting drama, and my lack of reaction was clearly not part of their script. They exchanged glances, touched hands for reassurance, and continued trying to engage me in their conversation about our future arrangements. When I finished my meal, I paid my check, left a generous tip, and stood up. I told them both to enjoy the rest of their evening and walked out of Romano's for what I knew would be the last time. The drive home felt surreal. Radio played our old songs, traffic lights seemed longer than usual, and familiar streets looked different somehow. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house we'd bought together 3 years ago. The porch light we'd installed last summer, the garden she'd started in spring, the mailbox with both our names. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. Inside, I poured myself a scotch and sat in my study. The photos on my desk showed our wedding day, vacations, holidays with family. Her smile looked different now in every picture. I wondered how long she'd been planning this moment. How many of those smiles had been performances? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I researched divorce attorneys online, read articles about asset division, and made a list of everything we'd need to separate. Bank accounts, mortgage, car loans, retirement funds, the timeshare in Colorado we bought last year. 8 years of intertwined finances would need to be untangled. By morning, I had appointments scheduled with 3 different lawyers for that day. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 5 times in my entire career, and spent the morning in legal consultations. The first attorney was too aggressive, suggesting we fight for everything and drag her through the mud publicly. The second was too passive, recommending mediation and amicable resolution. The third struck the right balance, professional, thorough, and committed to protecting my interests without unnecessary drama. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. 8 years of marriage reduced to legal documents and filing fees. The attorney explained the process, the timeline, the likely outcomes. In our state, with no children and fairly equal incomes, the division would be straightforward. She could have the house if she wanted the mortgage payments. I'd keep my retirement accounts, she'd keep hers. The papers were served the next day while I was at work. My phone started buzzing around noon, dozens of calls from her number. When I didn't answer, she started texting. Long messages explaining that she hadn't expected me to react this way, that she thought we could discuss things rationally, that she never intended to hurt me. The messages grew more frantic as the day progressed. She was sorry for the timing, sorry for the surprise, sorry for not handling things better. But she wasn't sorry for her choice, wasn't sorry for falling in love with someone else, wasn't sorry for ending our marriage. She was only sorry that I wasn't making it easy for her. That evening, she showed up at my office building. Security called up to inform me that my wife was in the lobby asking to see me. I told them I was unavailable and to please ask her to leave the premises. The calls continued for 3 days. Voicemails ranged from apologetic to angry to desperate. She accused me of being childish, of running away from problems instead of facing them like an adult. She said I was making things harder than they needed to be, that we could handle this situation maturely if I would just talk to her. On Thursday evening, I blocked her number. The silence was immediate and profound. For the first time since Tuesday night, my phone stopped buzzing constantly. I could think clearly, could plan my next steps without interruption. Update 1. The weekend brought unexpected visitors. Her sister showed up Saturday morning with coffee and bagels, apparently sent as an ambassador to negotiate peace. She explained that my wife was devastated by my reaction and couldn't understand why I was being so cold about the situation. I invited her sister inside and served the coffee she'd brought. We sat at the kitchen table where my wife and I had eaten breakfast together for 3 years. Her sister asked why I couldn't at least discuss the situation like adults, why I felt the need to involve lawyers immediately, why I was making everything so complicated. I explained to her sister that there was nothing complicated about the situation. My wife had fallen in love with another man, had chosen to end our marriage, and had informed me of these decisions at a dinner where she introduced me to her replacement. The legal response was straightforward: divorce papers. Her sister insisted that my wife still cared about me and had hoped we could remain friends through this transition. She mentioned that my wife was considering counseling to help us work through the practical aspects of separating our lives. I told her sister that friendship requires mutual respect and honesty, neither of which had been present in my wife's approach to ending our marriage. I thanked her for the coffee and bagels and walked her to the door. Sunday brought her parents. They knocked persistently until I answered, then pushed past me into the living room where we'd hosted them for countless dinners and holidays. Her father demanded to know what I thought I was accomplishing by refusing to communicate with their daughter. Her mother was more diplomatic, suggesting that marriages go through difficult periods and that perhaps we could work through this challenge together. She mentioned couples therapy, trial separations, and second chances. I listened to both of them without interrupting. When they finished, I explained that their daughter had already made her choice and had informed me of that choice by introducing me to her new partner at our anniversary dinner. There was nothing left to work through or discuss. Her father accused me of being vindictive and small-minded. He said that marriages require compromise and that I was abandoning my wife when she needed support most. He suggested that I was embarrassed by the public nature of the situation and was lashing out inappropriately. I walked them to the door and thanked them for their concern about our marriage. I mentioned that their daughter could reach me through my attorney if she needed to discuss practical matters related to the divorce. Monday morning brought news that she had hired her own attorney. Mine called to inform me that her lawyer had reached out about scheduling mediation sessions to discuss asset division and settlement terms. I told my attorney to inform her lawyer that I was amenable to mediation, but would not be communicating directly with my wife outside of legal proceedings. All discussions about our marriage, our assets, and our future would go through proper legal channels. Update 2. The first mediation session was scheduled for the following Friday. I arrived early and waited in the conference room with my attorney, reviewing our prepared statements and asset documentation. She arrived 10 minutes late with her attorney and her new partner. Seeing him again was jarring. At Romano's, he had seemed like an abstract concept, a symbolic representation of my wife's betrayal. In the sterile conference room under fluorescent lights, he became real, a man with graying temples and expensive shoes who was sleeping in my bed and planning a future with my wife. My wife looked tired. Her usual polished appearance had been replaced with dark circles under her eyes and hair that hadn't been styled with her typical care. She avoided eye contact when she entered the room and kept her focus on the legal documents spread across the table. Her attorney opened by suggesting that both parties wanted to resolve matters amicably and efficiently. He outlined their position on asset division, which was generous enough to indicate that my wife wanted this process finished quickly. My attorney responded with our position, which was equally reasonable. We weren't seeking punitive measures or attempting to claim more than fair market value for our shared assets. We simply wanted clean separation with minimal future entanglement. The discussion proceeded smoothly until her attorney mentioned that she was requesting to keep the house. She had become attached to the property and was willing to take on the full mortgage responsibility in exchange for buying out my equity stake. I looked at her for the first time since she'd entered the room. She was staring at the table, fidgeting with her pen, waiting for my response. Her new partner sat beside her, occasionally touching her arm in support. I told my attorney to agree to her request. The house held too many memories, and I had no desire to maintain any connection to that chapter of my life. She could have the mortgage payments and the property taxes and the responsibility of maintaining the garden she'd started in spring. She looked up when I agreed, surprise registering on her face. Perhaps she had expected me to fight for the house out of spite or nostalgia. Instead, I was giving her exactly what she wanted, the life we'd built together, modified to include her new partner instead of me. The mediation concluded with tentative agreements on all major points. Retirement accounts would remain separate, joint accounts would be closed and funds divided equally, and she would refinance the house to remove my name from the mortgage. As we gathered our papers to leave, she approached my side of the table. She asked if we could speak privately for just a moment, away from the attorneys and her partner. I told her that our attorneys could schedule another mediation session if there were additional matters to discuss. She insisted that she just wanted to explain her side of what had happened, to make sure I understood that she never intended to hurt me this way. I explained that her intentions were irrelevant to the legal proceedings. She had made her choice, I had made mine, and our attorneys were handling the practical consequences. There was nothing personal left to discuss between us. She stood there for several seconds, clearly wanting to say more, but unable to find words that would bridge the gap between us. Her partner eventually approached and guided her toward the door, his hand on her back in the same protective gesture I'd used countless times during our marriage. Update 3. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. 8 years of marriage dissolved into court documents and notarized signatures. I signed the papers in my attorney's office on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner at Romano's. My attorney mentioned that she had signed her documents the previous day and had asked him to convey her apologies for how everything had unfolded. She apparently told her lawyer that she regretted the timing and approach of her revelation, but didn't regret her ultimate decision. I thanked him for the information and asked about the timeline for finalizing asset transfers. The house refinancing would take another month, after which all financial ties between us would be severed completely. That afternoon, I received an envelope in my office mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from my wife, 3 pages of explanations, apologies, and justifications for her actions. She wrote about falling out of love gradually, about feeling trapped in our routine, about meeting someone who made her remember what passion felt like. She insisted that she had tried to find ways to revitalize our marriage before making her decision. She mentioned conversations where she had hinted at needing change, moments when she had suggested counseling or new activities together, signals that I had apparently missed or ignored. The letter concluded with her hope that someday I would understand her position and that we might eventually be able to maintain some form of friendship. She said she would always treasure the good years of our marriage and hoped I would too. I read the letter twice, then filed it with the other divorce documents. Her perspective was interesting but ultimately irrelevant. She had chosen her path, I had chosen mine, and our marriage was officially over. The house sale finalized 6 weeks later. She refinanced successfully and became the sole owner of the property we'd bought together with such optimism 3 years earlier. The final paperwork arrived on a Friday afternoon, officially severing our last legal connection. That evening, I celebrated with a bottle of wine at a new restaurant across town. The salmon was different from Romano's, but equally good. The service was attentive without being intrusive. I made a reservation for the following month. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that she and her partner had gotten engaged. They were planning a destination wedding in Italy and had started the consulting business they discussed at Romano's. Apparently, they were very happy together and had found the partnership they'd both been seeking. I was genuinely glad for them. She had made her choice and had found what she was looking for. The fact that it hadn't included me was initially devastating, but ultimately liberating. I was free to build a new life without the weight of trying to revive something that had already died. A year after the divorce, I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She was alone, waiting in line ahead of me, wearing the black dress from our anniversary dinner. She looked happy, relaxed and confident in a way I hadn't seen during our final months together. She noticed me behind her in line and smiled nervously. She asked how I was doing, mentioned that she'd heard I'd gotten a promotion at work, said she was glad things were going well for me. I told her I was doing well and asked about her business venture. She lit up describing their consulting firm, the clients they'd acquired, the travel schedule that kept them busy but fulfilled. When she reached the counter, she ordered her usual, medium latte with an extra shot and almond milk. Some things never change. She paid for her drink and turned back to me, clearly wanting to extend our conversation. I ordered my coffee, black, no sugar, and wished her well with her business and upcoming marriage. She thanked me and said she hoped I was happy, that I deserved to be happy. I told her I was very happy, which was true. The divorce had forced me to rebuild my life from scratch, to rediscover who I was outside of our marriage, to pursue interests and goals I'd neglected during our years together. She smiled genuinely for the first time since Romano's and walked toward the door. Halfway there, she turned back and told me she was sorry about the way things had ended, that she wished she had handled everything better. I told her that everything had worked out exactly as it should have. She got the life she wanted, and I got the freedom to build the life I wanted. Our marriage had run its course, and we had both moved on to better situations. She nodded, understanding finally settling in her eyes, and walked out into the afternoon sunshine with her new partner, who had been waiting patiently in their car. I sat by the window with my black coffee and watched them drive away together. They looked happy, comfortable, right for each other in ways that she and I had never quite achieved. The anniversary dinner at Romano's had been devastating in the moment, but it had also been honest in a way our marriage hadn't been for months. She had stopped pretending we were working, stopped going through the motions of a relationship that had already ended in her heart. Her approach had been cruel and thoughtless, but her decision had been correct. We weren't right for each other anymore, maybe never had been. The divorce had given us both permission to stop trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. 2 years later, I'm remarried to someone who shares my values and goals, someone who chose me deliberately and continues choosing me every day. We don't eat at Romano's. We have our own special places, our own traditions, our own anniversary memories. Sometimes I wonder if my ex-wife is still happy with her choice, if the passion she found with her partner has sustained itself through the practical realities of daily life together. But mostly, I don't think about her at all anymore. The divorce taught me that betrayal can be a gift if you're willing to receive it properly. She freed me from a marriage that wasn't serving either of us, even if she did it in the most hurtful way possible. Her honesty, brutal though it was, gave me the opportunity to build something better. That anniversary dinner at Romano's was the end of one story and the beginning of another. The surprise she planned destroyed our marriage, but saved us both from years of continued unhappiness. I never thanked her for that gift, but perhaps someday I will. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.